Behind the roaring speeches and massive parades of Nazi Germany existed a far more secretive world. This was the Nazi High Command, a closed circle of men who planned war, betrayal, and mass destruction from heavily guarded rooms. Adolf Hitler stood at the center, not as a distant politician, but as an obsessive commander who demanded absolute loyalty. He distrusted generals, ignored experts, and ruled through fear. Every major decision of World War II passed through this inner circle. The Nazi High Command was not a single unified machine. It was a battlefield of egos. Army leaders, Luftwaffe commanders, SS chiefs, and party officials constantly fought for Hitler's approval. Hermann Göring flaunted luxury while controlling the air war. Heinrich Himmler built a shadow empire through the SS, answerable only to Hitler. Joseph Goebbels shaped reality itself through propaganda, turning defeat into temporary setbacks for the German public. Military planning often happened in underground bunkers and fortified headquarters like the Wolves' Lair in East Prussia. Maps covered the walls. Pins marked advancing and collapsing fronts. Decisions affecting millions were sometimes made in minutes. Hitler increasingly relied on intuition rather than strategy. As the war progressed, he refused to retreat, ordering armies to fight to the last man, even when defeat was certain. One of the most dangerous secrets inside the High Command was how fragmented power truly was. Germany had no single, unified command structure. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and SS often worked against each other. This chaos weakened Germany's war effort from within, while Allied commanders coordinated strategy. Nazi leaders competed for influence, resources, and personal survival. The High Command also oversaw crimes on an industrial scale. Orders were signed, approved, or quietly ignored that led to mass executions, slave labor, and genocide. Many officers later claimed ignorance, but documents, meeting notes, and post-war trials proved otherwise. The machinery of destruction was bureaucratic, deliberate, and cold. By 1943, cracks were impossible to hide. Defeats at Stalingrad and in North Africa shattered confidence. Secret discussions of peace or resistance began to surface. Some officers plotted to kill Hitler, believing Germany could still be saved. Others doubled down, bound by ideology or fear. Loyalty became a death sentence. Inside the Nazi High Command, power did not guarantee safety. Promotions came with paranoia. Failure meant disgrace or execution. As Allied forces closed in, command rooms turned into tombs of denial. The same men who once planned world domination now argued over shrinking maps. This hidden world explains how Nazi Germany fought so fiercely and why it ultimately collapsed. The High Command was powerful, ruthless, and deeply flawed, and those flaws helped decide the fate of World War II. As the war expanded across Europe, the Nazi High Command became more isolated from reality. Early victories had convinced Hitler that he was a military genius. This belief poisoned every discussion. Experienced generals who questioned his decisions were silenced, dismissed, or reassigned. Strategy meetings no longer welcomed debate. They became performances of loyalty, where agreement mattered more than truth. Operation Barbarossa exposed the deepest flaws inside the High Command. The invasion of the Soviet Union was planned with confidence, but without preparation for a long war. Intelligence warnings about Soviet strength were ignored. Logistics were underestimated. When winter arrived, German armies froze, starved, and stalled. Still, Hitler refused withdrawal. He demanded obedience, believing willpower alone could defeat geography and numbers. The High Command structure made disaster worse. Hitler bypassed traditional command channels, issuing direct orders to field commanders. This created confusion and delay. Generals feared taking initiative, knowing disobedience could end their careers or their lives. Decisions that once took hours now took days, as officers waited for approval from a distant headquarters. Meanwhile, rival power centers grew more dangerous. Himmler expanded SS control over occupied territories, often clashing with army leadership. Göring promised air superiority he could not deliver, draining resources while protecting his status. The Navy and Army competed for supplies, while the Eastern Front consumed everything. No one coordinated effectively, and no one dared confront Hitler openly. Inside command rooms, maps began to shrink. Red pins marking Soviet advances pushed westward. Reports from the front softened the truth to avoid punishment. Losses were renamed strategic. Withdrawals, entire. Divisions vanished on paper, but not in reality. The High Command lived inside a fog of self-deception. By 1944, desperation replaced confidence. Allied bombing campaigns shattered German industry and morale. Meetings moved deeper underground. Hitler trusted fewer people, retreating into paranoia. He surrounded himself with loyalists rather than competent strategists. Military logic collapsed under ideology. Orders demanded cities be held at all costs, even when no forces remained to defend them. Some officers finally chose resistance. The July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler revealed how fractured the High Command had become. The failure of the plot led to brutal purges. Executions were filmed. Fear tightened its grip. Any remaining opposition vanished overnight. The Nazi High Command had transformed into a prison of its own making. It controlled vast armies, but lacked freedom of thought. Every decision accelerated collapse. What began as a system of domination ended as a mechanism of destruction turned inward. This stage of the war shows a crucial truth. Nazi Germany did not fall only because of Allied strength. By late 1944, the Nazi High Command was no longer planning victory. It was managing collapse. Allied forces were closing in from both west and east, and Germany was fighting on borrowed time. Inside headquarters, reality and fantasy existed side by side. Reports showed catastrophic losses, yet Hitler continued to speak of decisive counterattacks that no longer existed. The Ardennes Offensive, known in the United States as the Battle of the Bulge, revealed how detached the High Command had become. Hitler personally designed the plan, ignoring fuel shortages, air superiority, and exhausted troops. Senior officers privately doubted success, but publicly agreed. When the attack failed, blame fell downward. Hitler accepted no responsibility. Trust inside the command evaporated. As territory shrank, Hitler centralized power even further. He issued orders down to the level of individual divisions. Commanders in the field were reduced to messengers. Any retreat without permission was labeled betrayal. This rigidity destroyed flexibility, one of the core principles of modern warfare. The High Command had become a bottleneck, choking its own army. Fear ruled daily life inside command bunkers. Telephones carried news of lost cities. Couriers delivered execution orders. Officers watched colleagues disappear overnight. Loyalty was measured not by competence, but by obedience. Promotions were granted to those who echoed Hitler's beliefs, not those who spoke the truth. The High Command also struggled with moral collapse. Evidence of mass killings and concentration camps could no longer be denied. Some officers distanced themselves, while others actively assisted. Meetings discussed deportations with the same tone used for troop movements. Bureaucracy masked brutality. Paperwork replaced conscience. In the final months, Hitler withdrew almost entirely from reality. He trusted imaginary armies, believing they would save Berlin. Generals fed these delusions to survive. When confronted with the truth, Hitler exploded in rage, accusing everyone of treason. The High Command fractured completely. No unified strategy remained. As Soviet forces entered Germany, command centers became scenes of despair. Maps were outdated before meetings ended. Supplies were gone. Communication lines failed. The once feared High Command now reacted instead of controlled. Decisions came too late to matter. This phase of the war exposes the ultimate weakness of Nazi leadership. Absolute control destroyed honest communication. Ideology crushed strategy. Fear replaced logic. The High Command that once coordinated blitzkrieg across Europe now couldn't defend its own capital. World War II was not decided only on beaches and battlefields. It was also decided in silent rooms where truth was forbidden. And inside those rooms, the Nazi High Command sealed its own fate. In 1945, the Nazi High Command existed in a world of ruins. Germany was collapsing from every direction, yet orders continued to flow from underground bunkers as if victory were still possible. Hitler relocated to the F-Rehrbunker in Berlin, turning it into the final nerve center of a dying regime. The high command followed him into the earth, physically and mentally cut off from the outside world. Inside the bunker, days blurred together. Maps showed fronts that no longer existed. Entire armies were reduced to symbols and wishful thinking. Hitler issued commands to units that had been destroyed weeks earlier. Generals tried to correct him carefully, fearing violent outbursts. Truth had become dangerous. The remaining high command fractured into survival instincts. Some leaders attempted negotiations through back channels, hoping to save themselves. Others clung fanatically to Hitler, believing loyalty might spare them. A few quietly sabotaged orders, allowing troops or civilians to escape destruction. No unified purpose remained. One of Hitler's final acts was the Nero Decree, ordering Germany's infrastructure destroyed to deny resources to the Allies. This order revealed the mindset of total collapse. If Germany could not win, it should not survive. Several commanders, including Albert Speer, later claimed they deliberately ignored these commands, understanding they would doom millions of civilians. As Soviet forces encircled Berlin, command meetings became shorter and more chaotic. Communication with the outside world failed. Radios went silent. Couriers never returned. The high command was commanding nothing. Power had become an illusion. On April 30, 1945, Hitler ended his life. With his death, the Nazi high command lost its final anchor. Some leaders fled, others surrendered. A few committed suicide. The system that demanded absolute loyalty collapsed the moment its leader vanished. In the aftermath, Allied forces uncovered documents, orders, and recordings that revealed the inner workings of the high command. These records formed the backbone of the Nuremberg trials. Defendants claimed they were only following orders. The evidence proved coordination, knowledge, and intent. The myth of ignorance was destroyed. The end of the Nazi high command is a warning written in history. When power is centralized, without accountability, truth disappears. When fear replaces debate, disaster becomes inevitable. These men controlled armies and nations, yet they were ultimately defeated by their own system. The secret world of the Nazi high command did not end in glory or defiance. It ended in silence, rubble, and judgment, leaving lessons the world would never forget. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, the Nazi high command ceased to exist as a military force, but its legacy entered a new phase: judgment. Surviving leaders were captured, interrogated, and confronted with the consequences of their decisions. The secret meetings, hidden orders, and internal rivalries were no longer protected by power. They were exposed under Allied investigation. For the first time, the inner workings of the high command were laid bare. Millions of documents were seized. War diaries, signed directives, and recorded conversations revealed how deeply involved senior commanders had been in crimes of war. Claims of ignorance collapsed under evidence. Orders for executions, deportations, and collective punishment carried official signatures. The Nuremberg trials marked a turning point in history. High-ranking officers, ministers, and planners stood in court as individuals, not symbols. The world listened as prosecutors, demonstrated how the Nazi high command transformed ideology into systematic violence. The defense of just following orders was challenged and rejected. Responsibility could not be delegated upward forever. Some commanders expressed regret, others showed no remorse. A few attempted to portray themselves as professionals, trapped by Hitler's tyranny. Yet testimony from witnesses and survivors painted a consistent picture. The high command was not powerless. It chose compliance, ambition, and silence over resistance. The trials also revealed how modern bureaucracy enabled mass murder. Genocide was organized through schedules, logistics, and reports. Violence was hidden behind paperwork and military language. This exposure changed international law forever. New standards were created to hold leaders personally accountable for crimes against humanity. Beyond the courtroom, historians began reconstructing the psychological world of the Nazi high command. They found patterns of arrogance, fear, and ideological obsession. Success bred overconfidence. Loyalty replaced competence. Moral boundaries dissolved slowly, then completely. These were not monsters born in isolation, but men shaped by a system that rewarded obedience over humanity. For the United States and Canada, these lessons became part of military education. Civilian control, transparent command structures, and lawful conduct of war were emphasized to prevent similar disasters. The collapse of the Nazi high command became a case study in how not to lead. Today, the secret world of the Nazi high command serves as a warning rather than a mystery. Power without accountability corrodes judgment. Silence enables cruelty. And when truth is treated as a threat, collapse becomes inevitable. World War II ended on the battlefield, but its deepest lessons emerged afterward. The Nazi high command lost more than a war. It lost its claim to legitimacy, honor, and history itself. Decades after World War II ended, historians began to fully understand how dangerous the Nazi high command truly was, not just because of its power, but because of how normal it appeared from the inside. Many commanders were trained professionals, educated in respected military traditions. Yet within the Nazi system, professionalism slowly surrendered to ideology. One of the most revealing discoveries was how language was used to hide reality. Orders avoided words like murder or extermination. Instead, they spoke of security, measures, resettlement, and special treatment. Inside the high command, this language allowed officers to distance themselves psychologically from the consequences of their actions. Paperwork became a shield against conscience. The command culture rewarded obedience above all else. Promotions depended on loyalty, not ethical judgment. Officers who raised concerns were isolated or removed. Over time, silence became survival. This environment did not require every leader to be cruel. It only required them to look away. That collective blindness enabled catastrophe. Another critical lesson lies in how fear reshapes decision-making. Hitler's unpredictable rage created an atmosphere where honesty was dangerous. Reports were altered to match expectations. Failures were hidden. Successes were exaggerated. As reality drifted further from command discussions, strategic decisions lost all grounding. War was fought on fantasy maps. The Nazi high command also demonstrates how fragmented authority weakens even powerful states. Competing agencies, overlapping responsibilities, and personal rivalries wasted resources and time. Instead of unity, the system bred chaos. While the Allies improved coordination year after year, Nazi leadership collapsed inward. For modern audiences in the United States and Canada, this history carries lasting relevance. Democratic military systems emphasize accountability, lawful orders, and civilian oversight for a reason. The Nazi high command shows what happens when leaders are not questioned and power is worshipped rather than controlled. Importantly, the collapse was not sudden. It unfolded step by step. Each compromise principle made the next compromise easier. Each silent meeting normalized the unthinkable. By the time total destruction arrived, the system no longer recognized alternatives. The secret world of the Nazi high command was not hidden because it was complex. It was hidden because those inside chose comfort over courage. They convinced themselves they had no choice. History proved otherwise. Understanding this world is not about fascination with evil. It is about recognizing warning signs, blind loyalty, unchecked authority, and the suppression of truth. These patterns are not confined to one nation or one era. The story of the Nazi high command reminds us that wars are not only lost on battlefields, they are lost in conference rooms where the Nazi high command also left behind a dangerous myth that authoritarian control creates strength. In reality, it created fragility. The system appeared powerful because it moved fast and punished dissent. But beneath the surface, it lacked resilience. When plans failed, there were no safeguards, no honest feedback loops, and no room to adapt. Collapse was built into the structure. One of the clearest examples was intelligence failure. Accurate reports from the front often reached headquarters, but they were filtered, softened, or ignored. Intelligence officers learned what kind of information pleased leadership and shaped reports accordingly. As a result, the high command often acted on distorted data. Decisions were not wrong because of bad intelligence alone, but because truth was unwelcome. Training and doctrine also suffered. As ideology dominated, professional military education lost influence. Tactical flexibility gave way to rigid orders. Junior officers stopped thinking independently. Innovation slowed. Even when Germany developed advanced weapons late in the war, the high command lacked the strategic clarity to use them effectively. Technology could not compensate for broken leadership. The high command's relationship with the German people further revealed its moral collapse. Leaders continued to promise victory while cities burned and families fled. Total war demanded total sacrifice, but protection was reserved for elites. Bunkers were deep for commanders and shallow for civilians. This separation destroyed any remaining legitimacy. After the war, many former officers reintegrated into civilian life, especially in divided post-war Germany. Some wrote memoirs portraying themselves as apolitical professionals. Over time, historians challenged these narratives. Cross-referenced documents showed consistent patterns of knowledge and cooperation. The image of the clean, high command slowly fell apart. For allied nations, especially the United States and Canada, studying the Nazi high command reshaped military ethics and leadership training. Concepts like lawful orders, duty to refuse illegal commands, and shared responsibility were reinforced. Modern command structures emphasized transparency because secrecy without accountability proved catastrophic. The legacy of the Nazi high command is not confined to history books. It appears wherever leaders demand loyalty without truth, obedience without limits, and power without responsibility. These systems may function briefly, but they always fail under pressure. What makes the story unsettling is how ordinary many of the participants were. They were not all fanatics. Many were career officers who chose comfort, advancement, or fear over conscience. The system did not require everyone to be evil. It only required enough people to stay silent. World War II exposed the cost of that silence. Millions paid the price for decisions made in closed rooms. Another critical aspect of the Nazi high command was how it deliberately erased responsibility. Through layers of authority, orders flowed downward, consequences flowed outward, and accountability disappeared in between. This structure allowed senior leaders to claim distance from crimes they helped design. Each level blamed the one above, creating a chain where guilt was spread thin, but suffering was concentrated. Meetings of the high command often avoided explicit discussion of atrocities. Silence served a purpose. When everyone understood the outcome, no one needed to say it aloud. This unspoken agreement bound the leadership together. Speaking openly would have meant acknowledging responsibility. Remaining silent preserved careers and lives. The high command also relied heavily on dehumanization. Enemies were described as numbers, threats, or diseases. Entire populations were reduced to logistical problems. This language made extreme violence feel administrative rather than moral. Once people became abstractions, cruelty became efficient. This mindset shaped battlefield behavior. On the Eastern Front, especially, brutality was not a breakdown of discipline, but a command culture reinforced. From the top, orders encouraged ruthless action. Restraint was framed as weakness. Over time, this destroyed discipline instead of strengthening it. Violence spiraled beyond control, consuming soldiers psychologically and morally. Inside the high command, denial remained strong even as defeat approached. Leaders convinced themselves that history would understand their choices. They believed future generations would separate military necessity from criminal intent. This belief collapsed after the war, when documents revealed intent with devastating clarity. The post-war exposure shocked the world because it showed how modern, educated leaders could organize mass destruction without chaos. The Nazi high command proved that efficiency and evil are not opposites. When systems reward obedience and suppress empathy, cruelty can appear orderly. For American and Canadian audiences, this lesson resonates deeply. Democratic systems emphasize individual responsibility precisely to prevent such diffusion of guilt. Military leaders are trained to question unlawful orders, not just execute them. These principles were shaped directly by the failure of Nazi leadership. The enduring danger is assuming such a system could never happen again. History shows otherwise. Whenever authority becomes absolute and dissent becomes treason, similar patterns emerge. The Nazi high command is not unique because of its uniforms or symbols, but because of its structure. Understanding this helps explain how the war escalated so quickly and ended so brutally. The high command did not simply react to events. It shaped them through deliberate choices, repeated daily, inside closed rooms. The secret world of the Nazi high command teaches a final and settling truth. As historians piece together the final months of the Nazi high command, a striking pattern emerged. Most leaders understood the war was lost long before Germany surrendered, yet the machinery of command continued to operate. Orders were issued, reports were filed, and men were sent to die for objectives no longer believed in. The system kept moving because stopping it required moral courage few possessed. Inside command circles, survival became the primary goal. Some leaders focused on shaping their post-war narratives. Diaries were edited, documents were destroyed, blame was quietly shifted onto the dead. Hitler became a convenient shield, but evidence showed that many decisions were made willingly, not under direct threat. The high command also failed its own soldiers. As defeat became inevitable, leaders refused to prioritize lives over ideology. Teenagers and elderly men were drafted into last-ditch formations. Commanders spoke of honor while denying surrender options that could have saved thousands. Loyalty to the regime outweighed duty to those fighting. This period exposes the final transformation of the high command from planners of conquest to managers of sacrifice. War was no longer a means to victory, but a tool to delay accountability. Each extra day of fighting postponed judgment, even as it multiplied suffering. Allied intelligence intercepted communications revealing confusion and contradiction at the top. Orders conflicted, authority overlapped. Some commanders surrendered locally, while others demanded resistance. The once feared high command had lost coherence. It could no longer control events, only react to them. After the war, survivor testimonies revealed how deeply fear had shaped behavior. Many officers admitted they knew orders were wrong, but believed refusal meant death. This explanation raised a difficult question: when does fear excuse obedience? The Nuremberg trials answered clearly. Fear does not erase responsibility. For audiences in the United States and Canada, this distinction matters. Military service demands obedience, but it also demands judgment. The failure of the Nazi high command reinforced the principle that lawful orders must be questioned when they violate humanity. This lesson reshaped military ethics worldwide. The collapse of the high command was not dramatic in its final hours. There was no final master plan, no unified last stand. Instead, there was fragmentation, silence, and flight. Power dissolved quietly, leaving devastation behind. This stage of the story strips away the last illusions. The Nazi high command was not trapped by fate alone. It was trapped by choices repeated until alternatives disappeared. Each decision narrowed the path forward until only collapse remained. World War II ended with surrender, but the moral reckoning continued. The high command did not simply lose a war. It demonstrated how leadership divorced from conscience can turn organization into catastrophe. The final judgment of the Nazi high command did not come only from courts or historians. It came from the consequences written across Europe: destroyed cities, mass graves, displaced millions, and a shattered Germany. The men who believed they controlled history instead became examples of its harshest lessons. What ultimately destroyed the Nazi high command was not just military defeat, but moral bankruptcy. A command structure built on fear cannot sustain truth. A system driven by ideology cannot adapt to reality. And leadership that demands loyalty without responsibility inevitably collapses under its own weight. In the years after the war, scholars compared Nazi leadership with Allied command systems. The contrast was clear. Allied commanders argued, challenged assumptions, and adjusted strategy. Mistakes were acknowledged and corrected. Within the Nazi high command, disagreement was punished, and error was denied. This difference shaped the outcome of World War II as much as tanks or aircraft. The high command also revealed how easily institutions can normalize evil. None of its crimes began as sudden acts. They evolved through meetings, memos, and approvals. Each step felt small, technical, and justified. By the time the consequences were undeniable, the system no longer recognized morality as relevant. For modern audiences in the United States and Canada, this history remains deeply relevant. Democracies depend on leaders who tolerate criticism and systems that protect truth. Military strength is not measured only in weapons, but in ethical restraint and accountability. The Nazi high command lacked all three when they mattered most. The myth of total control, so carefully projected through propaganda, was exposed as hollow. Hitler did not command loyalty because he inspired confidence. He commanded it because dissent meant death. That is not leadership. It is coercion, and coercion collapses the moment fear loses its grip. The story of the Nazi high command also challenges a comforting belief that evil leadership is always obvious. In reality, it often appears disciplined, organized, and confident. It uses rules, ranks, and routines to hide its intentions. This makes it more dangerous, not less. When the war ended, the high command vanished, but its example endured. International law changed. Military ethics evolved. The phrase, "just following orders," lost its power as a defense. These changes were paid for with unimaginable human cost. The secret world of the Nazi high command is no longer hidden. It stands exposed as a warning across generations. Power without conscience destroys itself. Obedience without judgment enables atrocity, and silence in the face of wrongdoing is never neutral. World War II ended in 1945, but its lessons continue. The fall of the Nazi high command reminds us that the greatest threat to any society is not external enemies alone. It is leadership that abandons truth, humanity, and responsibility.